book soon. I can't believe we did all that. I'm exhausted. Hearing my bio, I'm exhausted. How fun is this for a local Hollywood boy to end up having a reading a book soon? I mean, I was an English major at UCLA, and the top dream was always that you would write a book, and it would end up in a bookstore on a shelf, and people would go through and go down the spine, and they're in the E's, and they go, oh, I'm going to pull that book out. Oh, that looks interesting, And so it's kind of a culmination of many years of dreaming that would come true. I took this weird left turn at some point and became a filmmaker instead. So you would go to a video store and find a DVD. But never before, has there been a book with that guy's name on it. So it's pretty exciting for me. What we're going to do today is that I'll read some from the book, but also because I know that everybody hasn't read it, I thought it's maybe a little bit more interesting if we do a little bit of a conversation as well. And so Todd's read the book, believe it or not.
Good job, Todd.
7 or 8 times.
Which version?
And so he'll help us kind of move along in conversation as we go. The main character of the book is a frustrated former singer who's now an adjunct professor at UCLA, and always wished that he could be a pop star. It starts, I don't know if you realize, but 99 Miles from LA is a song. It's written by Albert Hammond and Pal David, the guy who wrote It Never Rains in Southern California, which sounds like a really cheery song until you pay attention to what it actually says. So 99 Miles from LA, I heard for the first time at a Johnny Mathis concert, and I taped it live while he was singing it, just kind of fascinated by the song, and it always stayed with me. And so the opening of the book has the lyrics, and as you know, I'm a bit of a frustrated pop singer myself. So I thought I'd start by singing a phrase for you. The windshield is covered with rain. I'm crying, pressing my foot on the gas. I'm flying, counting the telephone poles. I phone you, reading the signs on the road. I write you, 99 miles from LA. We're laughing, we're loving. Please be there. Chapter 1. He sings along when he drives. His voice won awards when he was young, and it's far from unpleasant now, but he learned long ago that no one was going to pay him to be a professional musician in life. Still, he loves to sing. He holds the notes on the vowels because that's the way to sound good. You can't hold a consonant. In the car, he always tries to imagine an audience because it makes a difference. You sing better. The oncoming traffic becomes the blinding footlights in his mind's eye. The rain on the windshield stands in for that faint murmur of the crowd. The wet tires are cocktails being served. Even though you can't see the people, you look straight ahead and you sing outward at all of them and to each one individually. He had those dreams, yes, but he's had a lot of dreams that did not come true. This current one though, this one's gonna work because it isn't a dream, it's a plan. And this is the very last part of it now. Everything else worked. All the three of them have to do is come together, keep their heads, and not fight. He's pretty sure she's gonna be mad that she was hit so hard, but it had to be done to make it look real. Ramon though, Ramon will be glad to see him. He's damn sure of that, if he's there. He said he'd be there. 99 miles from LA. He hums the words he doesn't know. She could also get mad because he was already planning to see Ramon without her being there. Anyway, she doesn't know about him and Ramon, so she can't be mad. And even if she is, who cares? He's spent his whole life trying to please people. No more. He was supposed to drive to the desert tonight. Ramon will be out there too, but not at her Palm Springs house. They can't risk that one of them has been followed. But who would follow them for 100 miles without picking one of them up? If the cops were onto them, they'd have stopped the car by now. And if her husband somehow figured it out, he'd be dead before the 111. 99 miles from LA. You know why all the movie stars all went to Palm Springs back in the day? According to local lore, they were salaried and under contract to the studios, but wouldn't let them go further than 100 miles beyond the studio zone when they were engaged on film, so they could be called back to set. The studio zone started in the 1920s as a 6-mile radius from Rossmore and 5th, and slowly it elbowed its way into a 30-mile circle, emanating out from La Cienega and Beverly, literally a circle on the map, drawn as if there were a compass anchored at that street corner. To this day, anything inside the circle is fair game to ask actors to come to set for filming without paying them for travel. Once upon a time, the scuttlebutt was that it also dictated how far they could stray on their downtime. The furthest thing out west, just outside of the 30-mile studio zone, Forest Lawn Cemetery. And 99 miles from there, Palm Springs. Well, really, you're still inside of the 100 all the way to Rancho Mirage, which is why some say so many of the Frank Sinatras and Bob Hopes had houses out there. In time, it became to be known as the 2-hour rule, but that's likely a modern interpretation because before the 10 freeway was installed circa 1965, it would have taken a good 3+ hours to get from Los Angeles to the celebrity playground that was the Desert Inn. There's an oft-repeated rumor that the real reason the likes of Rock Hudson and Jane Mansfield skipped out of Hollywood to spend weekends in this little Sin City had more to do with morals clauses in their deals that restricted them from engaging in various and nefarious activities, and so getting out that far out of town unofficially meant they were off duty. Even the gossip columnists let down their hair and joined the party. He read all of this history right after she told him Palm Springs would be their getaway. He shook his head and he slapped himself. Driving alone at night is always hard. You get mesmerized by the dark void. That's why he likes to sing. It puts your mind on something else, the meaning of the lyrics, the sound of your voice, how you would sing it versus the rendition you're listening to, how you could make it a hit. Maybe it should be the first song on your record, or maybe it should be buried, a deep track, and they discover it. He hit replay so he could sing it again. He knew the cadence is better, so he was sure to do a better job this time. The live Johnny Mathis version is really the only version. Art Garfunkel's was muddy. Dion's a goddess, but her rendition on this one came late in her career, so it's comparatively overproduced. Albert Hammond wrote it, so you'd think his was the definitive recording, and he had the #1 adult contemporary chart topper. But hits don't mean a thing when it comes to judging quality. Not in music, not in movies, not in art. Hammond's also the guy who penned and performed It Never Rains in Southern California, which everyone thinks is an anthem about how pretty it is in the land of fruit and nuts, when really it's about how crushing it is to dream of fame and success. And that is the problem with Hammond's singing. His writing, devastating. His voice, it lets you off the hook. You ignore the tragedy, remember the catchy part, and you forget there's a whole goddamn song going on. You can blame the audience, but that's the singer's responsibility. On second thought, maybe that's Hammond's genius. If you can make people sing happily along to your words, they're damning their whole existence, well, that's quite a trick. Anyway, the point is, when Mathis sings it, you see it. His hands are on the wheel. The rain is on the windshield, like tonight. It's there. He'd gotten ahead of the song, though, because the intro is long, and there was nothing to imagine yet, but that's normal when you're a singer. When you're a singer, the intro is the part where you have to feel what's coming. You don't just sit there waiting for your first note. You picture the whole thing. You see it all laid out before you, like how he could see this whole deal right now, coming together the way it was planned. What she'd say is that he could have found a way to apologize if he wanted to. But he knew not to get caught by that. He knew not to fall into that trap. He was playing it safe. He was sticking to the plan, which is ironic, considering what he had already planned to do on live.
Dun, dun, dun. I got to appreciate today your excellent editing of the song 99 Miles from LA. It's like a greatest hits version of the song. Very well done. So something that I think is most interesting about why you wrote at this time, I noticed there are several other esteemed screenwriters with us today, and we were screenwriters for many years. That's how we began our professional relationship. And it was so interesting, your logic behind not wanting to write another blueprint for something no one would ever see.
It's writing a screenplay is difficult because it has a million rules, right? You can only write what you can see. You know, it's going to end up on screen. So it's dialogue and it's action. And you can do a little bit of a description here or there. You can try to suggest something, but it's really not your job. And if you start doing, when you write like paragraphs, chunky paragraphs of information in a screenplay, people start crossing it out. So to write a book was such a different experience. You suddenly, like, there will be no screen. The screen is inside of people's heads. And so it's just black and white on a page, what I say and what it makes somebody else
And a
think.
screenplay is just dialogue.
Well, it's dialogue and it is description. I mean,
It's
you
description, but
you're a bit of an architect, like, you know, obviously screenwriting is an art form. It's a great art form.
true, but you do it with dialogue and the description. You're doing it purely with description.
And the other thing that I did inside of this book, which you'll find as you take a look at it, is that I was afraid that people would accuse me of writing a screenplay in a book form, right? Because, you know, it's what I'm sort of known for. So there's literally no dialogue. There are no quotation marks until a very important part, like in, I think, chapter 25, where finally they say something to each other. But up until then, it's all buried inside of the text. You know what people are saying, you know what conversations are happening, but I wanted it to be that it wasn't David writing a screenplay and sticking on a shelf at a bookstore. Cheap.
Also, of course, we love pop music. One of the reasons we got together is because I found that mixtape and it was like ABBA, Partridge Family. So tell me about the musical influence on your book, since clearly it is a song.
Yeah, well, it started with a song, right? With this particular one, it was 99 Miles from LA that started me off on the whole idea of writing it. And the song itself is like a kind of song of longing. It's a couple that have clearly separated and broken out. The singer is driving, hoping that person will be there when he gets to her, and, you know, in the case of Johnny Mathis singing it. But you kind of feel it's not going to work out. You know that it's doomed, like from the cadence of the song, from the tone of the song, from the memories that he has. You just think, when he gets there, this is not coming together. And I'm kind of obsessed with noir in general. Most of the things that I write are out of the noir epic. And I thought about how noir really flourishes when we don't believe that the systems that are in place are working for us. We're almost sure that you can't get ahead through kind of normal channels, right? You need to cross to the dark side. You've got to go to the other side of the law, because whatever you're doing to try to get ahead by working hard and being a good person is failing. So that idea of those two things, like this relationship that you know is probably not going to happen and is falling apart, and you have these dreams of success and belief in your own life and belief in this country that we live in, and know in your heart of hearts that that's probably all going to go down the tubes at some point, to me was kind of an interesting marriage. And so then I started thinking of the characters. The lead character, in order to kind of bring this idea of music into it, is an adjunct professor in music working at UCLA, disgruntled, unhappy, and kind of ready for something to come along and maybe introduce another path for having his dreams come true in life. And so once I had this character who was engaged so deeply with music, then music started creeping its way all the way through the whole book. Because if I did things through his perspective, suddenly, he's one of those people who listens along and sings along and always has the radio on. And
I love you always refer to a song, or it's always specific. It's not just the music.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because I had to justify that at one point because I thought, well, how come the song always works so well in the scene? And then I thought, well, that's kind of what happens, right? Like whatever emotions we're going through, you hear a song and then you go, I relate to that, of what's going on in the song. So I found a place to kind of put that idea in, that he has those feelings. I could read.
I was going to say, I want to ask you another question about character, but perhaps you should introduce another character. So
I'm going to read from chapter 2, which is where the two of the main characters in the book meet. So we have Frank, who is kind of the lead character, and Shelley, the lead female character, and this describes a lot of what I was just talking about. I think about Frank and music and frustration. The way they met was sad. He liked to walk through the UCLA sculpture garden when he was in between classes or academic responsibilities, an adjunct professor of vocal coaching and music performance. His students admired him, and he'd often find one of them hanging out, maybe under the Rodin, L'Homme qui Marche, or leaning up against Zuniga's Desnudo reclining. A self-described bisexual, he always felt this next admission marked him as a cliche, but he'd tell any one of them who asked that he liked the Henry Moore the best, the one called Two Reclining Figures. If he was going to picture himself inside any one of these sculptures, he'd tell them he'd join the party on that one. That usually got a laugh or at least a raised eyebrow out of either sex he was talking to. But he vowed, never sleep with a student. Too easy of a mark and too depressing to think about why they want to be with you. He would tell himself. But lunch conversation was okay, even if it got a little flirty. This particular day, he was in a mood, and he didn't care if he did something he shouldn't. He'd just walked up the hill from Schoenberg Hall after suffering through the professorial version of a prisoner going up for parole. Academic review. Imagine silently sitting before a group of yahoos who hold your future in their hands, a gaggle of losers you wouldn't talk to at a party, much less listen to their opinion on how you should conduct yourself. You know the type, with dandruff and bad suits. And those are the women. These days, the whole thing is made worse by a common practice that should never have been allowed in the first place: student evaluations. Not evaluations of the students, mind you, written evaluations of the professors by the often disgruntled and now fully empowered undergraduates. Towards the end of the term, some impartial emissary from administration interrupts your class unannounced and tells you to leave the room while they pass out forms that encourage constructive criticism of the instructor and the course itself. Imagine paying customers, the students actually refer to themselves as such, leaving Yelp reviews, all the while knowing they're about to get a B instead of an A for their lackluster performance and middling talent that deserve no higher than a C minus. Being a teacher is demoralizing. Helping other people become what you were never able to do. Maybe that's a bad way to look at it, but after a while it gets to you. It pays like crap, and when you're an adjunct, you get no benefits. And since a class gets broken down into weeks, you feel the calendar. You look at them and you can see who you used to be. And now, you know, like most of them, you're never going to be anything. You're never going to have anything with it. So on this particular day, he was feeling so low, he was considering quitting. On this particular day, he would have robbed a bank if you asked him to. And who'd have ever thought how close to that was about to come. When he sidled up to her, careful, apologetic for the disruption, she was crying over her fifth Daisy, who was clearly so sick it couldn't move. She had been to the vet already, and they told her it was too late for any more surgery. The cancer had metastasized, but she couldn't bring herself to pull the trigger, so to speak. She grabbed the mud up, wrapped it in this blanket she had in her trunk, and decided to have one last moment with the old girl, outside, under some trees, in nature. Poetic, huh? But a lousy, sappy verse. more Rod McEwen than John Keats. The Romantics, they knew how to spin melancholy. That thought would have started her crying all over again if he had not asked if she was a student, which made her smile, thinking, there's no way he thinks she's young enough to be enrolled here. She took it as a first sign that he had come over with some idea of picking up on her. She went to school at UCLA 20 years ago, starting late when she was 20 as an English major, which is such a joke, she said, because what the fuck are you supposed to do in life with an English lit degree? Anyway, that's how she knew about the sculpture garden and poetry and how romanticism relates to death, and then she quoted a poem she knew by heart. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. Well, to be fair, she explained Emily Dickinson wasn't a romantic, she was a realist. But her brand of realism romanticized death, and that's about as romantic as you can get. Trying to relate and banter on her level, he recounted that the only poem he knew by heart was Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold. He had to memorize it in class when he was an undergraduate. He was pretty sure his teacher called Arnold the first true modernist, even though he wrote that ditty way back in 1860 whatever, and by modern, he probably meant it was a damning account of humanity. From what he could remember, with the whole confused alarms and ignorant flashes by night and all of that, an unable focus, she turned his voice off. Deflating, she sunk lower, putting her cheek over the still warm belly of that dog. Realizing he lost her, he sat down to put a sympathetic hand on her back, and when that caused her to let out that uncontrollable sob, to his surprise, he cried with her for a moment, and she liked that. He struggled for some comforting words, but she was the one who said, there's really nothing to say. It's over. Or it would be, the minute she decided she had done justice to this poetic gesture. But now she had a problem. All this grief and crying had taken it out of her. She was not sure she could carry the dog back to her car by herself. She barely got it here. The parking lot they put her in is pretty far down the hill. She asked for P3, but it was sold out. So they put her in P2 all the way down below the Herb Alpert Music Building. And she had an idea if he'd go for it, which is that she could go get the car if he'd stay there with the dog. But of course, he stopped her from going any further with all of that. The music building is where he works. So we offered to walk with her, do the carrying. And that's where she really broke down. At the car. What was he to do? Let her drive in that condition? He called his coordinator and said to tape a sign on the door for the students. Class canceled. Family emergency. And so he drove her rolls to the bed. He held her hand when the doctor put the needle in, and she clung hard and close against his chest, sobbing again after she saw that awful last breath pass out of the yellow-toothed muzzle of the only real friend I've ever had. That's how she described that cancer-mangled, gray-faced, skinny, junkyard Mongol. And it pretty much ripped his heart out right then and there. She needed a drink, and she knew where she wanted to go.
So, I'm lucky because I have a very big insight into the author. So as I was reading this, I was surprised how much I recognized from our life, from your life, from what you told me, names. But all the characters, this is happening to all the three main characters of the book. So they're all you.
Well, they're all me and they're all not me. There's a term that I've learned since writing the book. I didn't go into it with that idea. But around the time of Truman Capote, a little bit before, they coined a term called autofiction, autobiographical fiction, where you take things from real life and you weave them in to what you're writing. And so, as I said, I was an English major. I went to UCLA. Well, Shelley's an English major. I was an adjunct professor, as Alex knows, and Amanda, right? Where'd Amanda? Right? Anyway, but so I've taught film, and it's not that I have had those feelings. It's that I understand that exact kind of feeling about what it means to teach and teach people in the kind of current climate and environment that we're in. And so what I was trying to do, I think, was sort of weave those details in so everything feels very real, but the characters all kind of take on lives of their own. And what I find, and I find this true in screenwriting as well as in writing something like this, is that when you define your characters really well, and they each can kind of hold a space, they begin to talk and tell you what's going to happen, and what happens in the next scene, and how things come together. So, and for instance, like the very opening scene of the dog at the UCLA Sculpture Garden, Todd and I did that together with our first dog, Killer. But the description of the dog that dies is really butchy, right? So, so it's like kind of taking things and playing with them.
Well,
and
all
merging
4
them together.
dogs do appear in the novel,
Right.
in one form.
We never had a role set up. But you know, it's the fun of both of those things. I think that's the fun of fiction, is that you can use the things that are from real life, but then pile on all of each other.
And you said the crime is also ripped from the headlines.
The
right?
crime in the book is ripped from the headlines. So I'm writing about people who are desperate to kind of figure out how to change their lives, and they've decided to commit a crime to do it, is what I decided before I've written. And you know, these days, where do you go to steal cash? Like, if you were to knock over this bookstore, how much money you're going to get, right? Enough to change your life? Like, no. If you go to the bank, you actually have to order money. Like, if I'm going into the bank and I want my $20,000 in cash, I have to call ahead and tell them I'm going to need cash today, and they order money and they bring it there. So you go into a bank and knock over a bank, there's no money. There's certainly not $3+ million that's going to change not one person's life, 3 people's lives who have to come together and commit this crime together. So I was looking for something that was a cash business. And I went out to lunch with a friend of mine, and he said, the marijuana business, the pot business, he said, it's all cash.
Yep.
You know, you go into the dispensary, you have to pay in cash. And so I was looking it up and sort of reading about it. And it turns out that there was a sort of case in San Diego where this couple that were in the pot business had their workers follow them home, and they knew that they had been burying money in their backyard. And so they came, they abused the wife, they stole all of the money, and so it was kind of like a rip from the headlines, cheery little crime that I based my book on. And so that became the basis of the crime. Shelley's husband is a marijuana dealer, and she's in a very unhappy marriage, and she is the one who's really looking for the way out. And so she's looking for, partners. So when Frank stumbles upon her that day, her wheels are already kind of turning. And the bar that she goes to is the bar that she goes to regularly, and our third character, Ramon, is the bartender who works at that bar. And so the 3 of them now come together to pull off this crime, and then hide out in Palm Springs. The same.
And there's so much great vintage Los Angeles in the book, and contemporary Palm Springs.
Yeah. Again, it's like, I'm an Angelino. Grew up here, born and raised. I went to Hollywood High School, lived up Beechwood.
I know, look.
My sister's
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So to me, Los Angeles is kind of naturally a great setting for noir, because the dreams that are set up here are impossible to achieve. Right? You come here hoping for fame and fortune and success, and what percentage? Is it 1%? I mean, what percentage of the people who come here hoping to have that happen actually have that dream happen? So it's a natural sort of breeding ground for discontent and wanting to figure out how to change your life, make your dreams come through some other means. And then Palm Springs is a very kind of strange oasis of mid-century modern architecture, which harkens back to the 50s and 60s when those dreams were possible, right? But now it's this thing in the middle of the desert that's a luxury community, and the minute you step outside of it, it barely exists. It's an oasis. So between the 2 of them, I kind of felt like that's a real breeding ground for noir. And I like street corners and names of stores and names of buildings. Like I said, I went to UCLA, so I know that parking lot. Peak 3, which is
Right.
So you also
when
went
they
to
shove you down at the other parking lot, that's so far to walk.
you also went to Hollywood High School and LeConte Junior High School.
Right, which features heavily in chapter 5. The backstory often for my characters will get pulled from things that are from my life, and I pulled in all sorts of fun different things from it. There's a whole litany of girls at school that were the surfers. We went to LeConte Junior High School, you know, right here in the middle of Fountain. When you drive down Fountain and you have to jog around that goddamn, looks like a prison, junior high school. And so we used to ditch school and take the bus down Santa Monica Boulevard to go to the beach, Station 17. And not a one of us knew how to surf. But we got called the surfers by the other gangs. The school was full of gangs. And so they dubbed us the surfers ironically because we didn't surf. So there's a whole litany of all the surfer girls, and my main character's name gets written at the bottom of all the girls. They write all the boys on one side and all the girls on one side, and my main character's name gets written down at the bottom of all the girls because he hangs out with the girls. So yeah, there's a lot from the history.
And I'm sure, since most of you are family here, you'll recognize a few things.
But so I could read more, or we could sign and then go hang
Or
out.
does anyone
you
have a
know,
burning question?
right? Or any questions or thoughts or anything like that?
Oh, the young lady in the back.
This young lady in the back has a question.
Hello. You did say that you didn't want to write a screenplay in book form, but so much of what you teased with us today, I will say, conjures
Yes.
a natural adaptation, shall we say. I mean, has that been spoken about? You have a whole soundtrack. It's like an Ebersole Hughes in the making. Although I respect the genre, and I'm so proud of you, and I love that whole interior subtext and all of that. I love this idea of this. I'm very, very, very excited that you were able to do that because you are a deep thinker. So to be able to bring that to all of this is going to be fantastic.
My agent asked me,
Yeah.
and he said, so, when are you writing the screenplay? And I said, you know what, you can sell it if you want to. You can put it out into the world in that way, but a little bit like sort of how I feel about the characters in this book, I'm tired of the game. That's not the game I'm playing or that I want to play. And then you make casting lists, and then the movie never gets made for a million years. So what I was like, you can go sell it, and I hope that some terrible director gets attached to it, and the worst screenwriter comes along and changes it to a happy ending, and cast it completely wrong, so that everybody leaves saying, I like the book.